The deck shudders beneath your boots. June 4, 1942. The Pacific stretches flat and blinding under a white sun that burns the skin through cloth. Salt stings your lips. Aviation fuel hangs in the air, sharp and oily, a smell that crawls into the back of your throat. Somewhere ahead, beyond the empty blue, men you cannot see are already dying. On the flight deck, engines howl, propellers blur into silver discs, and the wind claws at your jacket as if trying to tear you from the ship. You feel it before you understand it. Something enormous is about to break. This is where the myth of Japanese invincibility is about to die. For 6 months, the Imperial Navy has cut across the ocean with a reputation that feels untouchable. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Singapore, Wake. Everywhere, speed and surprise have turned defenses into wreckage and retreat. The doctrine is simple and absolute. Strike first, strike hard, and the enemy will collapse before the second blow. The carrier force, 4 great flat tops, the elite of Japan's naval air arm, is the blade of that doctrine. If these ships remain intact, the Pacific belongs to Japan. If they do not, everything changes. In the hours before dawn on those decks, confidence is not bravado. It is routine. Pilots strap in, checking gauges with hands that know the motions by heart. Deck crews roll bombs into place, metal wheels clattering across steel. Engines are tested, shut down, tested again. The men have done this too many times to doubt it. Somewhere out there, they believe, an American carrier force is waiting to be found and destroyed. It is not a question of whether they will win, only how completely. They have the numbers. They have the experience. They have never been defeated. Below decks, the carriers are living machines. Elevators grind upward with aircraft stacked wing to wing. Fuel lines snake across the planking. Ordnance crews sweat in the rising heat, wrestling bombs the size of men into place. Every movement has a purpose. Every sound, metal on metal, shouted orders, the whine of engines, belongs to a system that has worked flawlessly from the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. The men move inside it as if inside a body, each part confident the whole will do what it has always done. At first light, the first wave lifts off toward Midway Atoll. You watch the planes shrink into the glare until they are nothing but insects against the sky. The ocean below is calm, indifferent. Minutes pass, then more. The decks stay busy. More aircraft are moved. Bombs are brought up from below. The smell of fuel thickens as the sun climbs and the heat presses down. You can feel the day tightening like a wire being drawn taut. The reports begin to return. Midway is not broken, the airfields still function. Anti-aircraft fire is heavier than expected. Fighters are still in the air. The target is wounded, not dead. The words ripple across the decks and into the ready rooms. Orders follow. The aircraft waiting for the next strike must be rearmed. Bombs meant for ships are hauled back down. Land attack munitions are dragged up. Men strain in the heat, shoulders slick with sweat, wrestling metal across steel. Planes are pushed, pulled, turned. The decks fill. Fuel is pumped. Ordnance is stacked where it can be reached fastest. It is a choreography of speed, confidence, and habit. No one calls it danger. They call it efficiency. Far away, American aircraft are already coming. They arrive in fragments like pieces of a storm that cannot quite gather. Torpedo planes first, low and slow, skimming the water like doomed birds. You hear the guns before you see them, the flat crack of anti-aircraft, the chattering roar of fighters diving. The sky fills with black puffs and streaks of tracer fire. One after another, the attackers are cut down. Aircraft slam into the sea and vanish in white explosions. Survivors bob briefly in the water, then drift away. The defense seems perfect. The doctrine appears proven. Above the fleet, fighters wheel and dive, hunting the last intruders. On deck, men watch the carnage and believe they are witnessing the final act. But the air has thinned. The fighters are low on fuel. The decks are still crowded with aircraft waiting to be rearmed, refueled, relaunched. Bombs lie stacked where they should never be. Fuel vapors hang in the heat. The machinery of victory has become a trap of its own making. High above, where no one is looking, American dive bombers are already in position. They break through the clouds like knives through cloth. For a heartbeat, there is only sunlight and the sudden shadow of wings. Then the world tilts. You hear a scream that is not human, the rising, tearing sound of a bomb falling through air. It ends in a concussion that knocks the breath from your lungs. The deck leaps, metal buckles, fire erupts where planes stood seconds before. Another impact, then another. The neat order of the flight deck collapses into flame, smoke, and debris. Fuel ignites in sheets. Bombs cook off, throwing men and machines into the air. Aircraft burn where they sit, wings folding, cockpits melting. The roar is so loud it feels inside your skull. On one carrier, the first bomb punches through the deck and detonates among fueled aircraft. On another, a second strike sets off a chain of explosions that races from bow to stern. On a third, fire tears through the hangar like a living thing, devouring everything it touches. Men run, then disappear into smoke. Others fall where they stand, silhouettes against orange light. The heat is immediate, suffocating. You taste oil and burning rubber. You cannot see the horizon anymore. The sea itself seems to recoil. 5 minutes, that is all it takes. When the smoke begins to thin, the decks are unrecognizable. What had been the heart of an empire's naval power is now a maze of twisted metal, burning wreckage and bodies. 3 carriers are mortally wounded, their flight decks turned into furnaces. Crews fight the fires with hoses that feel like toys against an inferno. Some men throw themselves overboard to escape the heat. Others stay, because someone must try. The 4th carrier, untouched for the moment, turns away, desperate to survive a battle that has already been decided. Silence follows the violence, heavy and unreal. The guns stop. The sky empties. Only the crackle of fire and the groan of damaged steel remain. The ocean, unchanged, laps at hulls that are already dying. Damage control begins immediately. Men move through smoke so thick it burns the eyes, dragging the wounded sealing compartments, flooding spaces to starve the flames. They work because sailors always work. They work because the alternative is to watch the ship die. But there is no reversing what has happened. The ships that define Japanese power are crippled beyond saving. One by one, they will be abandoned. One by one, they will slip beneath the surface, taking with them pilots, mechanics, doctrine, and the belief that this war could be decided by speed and audacity alone. The attempt to recover is immediate and futile. New plans are shouted across bridges. Escorts move in. The remaining carrier tries to launch what aircraft it can. But the aircrews that made the early victories possible are gone, killed in the first attack, trapped in burning hangars, or lost in the sea. Even where men survive, the system does not. Fuel is contaminated. Ordnance is destroyed. Decks are unusable. The machinery that once turned confidence into dominance now produces only smoke. By afternoon, the retreat has begun. What follows is not a dramatic collapse but something colder, the slow recognition that the war has changed shape. Japan still has ships, it still has soldiers, it still has courage in abundance. But the spine of its naval air power, the trained pilots, the carriers that delivered them, the doctrine that bound them together, has been broken in a single morning. Replacement will not be quick. Industry cannot conjure experienced aircrews overnight. Shipyards cannot replace lost carriers in months. Fuel, steel, and time are suddenly enemies as real as any fleet. The ocean does not care about courage. It cares about logistics. The consequences spread outward like a stain. The Japanese Navy can no longer strike where it chooses. It must react. It must defend. Each operation becomes smaller, more cautious, more desperate. Across the Pacific, American shipyards pour out carriers, escorts, aircraft, an industrial tide that does not slow. New pilots arrive as fast as old ones are lost. Supply lines stretch, then thicken. What was once a series of brilliant thrusts becomes a grinding contest of production, repair, and replacement. This is the moment when the old way of war dies. Not because men stop being brave. They do not. Not because sacrifice disappears. It does not. But because bravery without replacement becomes exhaustion. Because sacrifice without supply becomes extinction. Because a doctrine built on perfect timing and flawless execution cannot survive a world where factories, fuel, and training decide what can be fought again tomorrow. The ships that burned at Midway carry more than steel and men to the bottom. They take with them the illusion that momentum alone can win a modern war. And yet the story does not end with smoke on a flight deck. It deepens. In the days that follow, the surviving Japanese forces attempt to salvage what remains. Crews are pulled from the sea. Wounded men are treated in spaces that still reek of smoke. Reports are written in a language of understatement that cannot hide the truth. 3 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, are gone. Soryu, the last, will be found and finished before the sun sets. With them vanish not only ships, but the carefully trained air groups that took years to build. These were not replaceable parts. They were the core of a system, designed for one kind of war and one kind of victory. Across the ocean on American decks, the mood is different. There is no triumphal roar, no sense that the war has been won. The pilots who survived look back at the empty sky where their comrades should have been. They count the missing. They smell the oil on the water. They understand that what they have done is irreversible, and that it has been done at a cost measured in lives, not headlines. Victory does not feel like celebration. It feels like standing on the edge of something vast and dark, knowing it is only the beginning. The myth that dies at Midway is not merely that Japan cannot be beaten. It is something deeper, the belief that war in the modern world can be decided by a single stroke of daring, by the brilliance of a plan, by the moral force of will. For months, the Imperial Navy had embodied that belief. It had moved faster, struck harder, and forced its enemies into retreat. The lesson seemed obvious. Whoever seized the initiative would dictate the outcome. Midway proves the opposite. It shows that initiative without depth is fragile. That speed without sustainability is a gamble. That a system built on elite skill but narrow margins can be shattered by a few moments of misalignment, by planes refueling at the wrong time, by bombs stacked in the open, by fighters pulled low in pursuit of a threat already spent. The men who fought that morning do not speak in abstractions. They remember the heat, the noise, the smell of burning paint and fuel, the way the deck felt under their feet when the first bomb hit. They remember faces in smoke, the weight of a wounded man on their shoulders, the sudden quiet after the firestorm. For them, history does not change in theories. It changes in sensations. In the months that follow, the war in the Pacific becomes something else. The Japanese advance stalls. Operations that once leapt forward now grind inch by inch across islands and seas. Without carrier dominance, the Imperial Navy cannot protect its supply lines or project power at will. The Americans, still learning, still making mistakes, now have something their enemy no longer does. Time. Time to train. Time to build. Time to replace what is lost. Factories in the United States do not pause. Steel becomes hulls. Aluminum becomes wings. Training fields fill with new pilots who will never know the early defeats. The Pacific fills with convoys. Airfields appear where there had been jungle. The war becomes a contest of endurance, and endurance is measured in output as much as in courage. The human cost, meanwhile, continues to mount on both sides. Pilots who survive Midway will die later over Guadalcanal, over the Solomons, over the long chain of islands that stretches toward Japan itself. Sailors pulled from the water will return to sea on ships that no longer have the aura of invincibility. They fight on, because soldiers always do, but they fight within a war that has turned against the logic that once sustained them. There is a temptation to see Midway as a miracle, as a moment when fortune simply favored one side. But miracles do not burn for 5 minutes and leave behind wreckage that cannot be replaced. What happens here is not luck. It is exposure. The exposure of a system optimized for decisive blows to a reality that demands something else. Depth, redundancy, the ability to absorb loss and continue. The environment itself becomes an enemy. The Pacific is vast. Distances devour fuel. Salt corrodes machinery. Weather scatters formations and erases careful planning. Disease stalks crews confined for months at sea. In such a world, the margin between victory and collapse is not bravery alone. It is the ability to move men, machines, and material across thousands of miles, again and again, without breaking. Japan cannot do this at the scale required, not because its people lack will, but because its industrial base cannot sustain the tempo of modern war. Each carrier lost is not merely a ship. It is years of labor, training, and coordination sunk into the sea. Each pilot lost is not merely a name on a list. It is a skill set that cannot be mass-produced. After Midway, every subsequent operation is haunted by this arithmetic. The Americans, by contrast, enter a phase where loss, though still painful, is survivable. Ships are damaged and repaired. Carriers are sunk and replaced. Air groups are rebuilt. The war becomes not a sequence of daring gambles, but a grinding test of who can keep fighting tomorrow after being wounded today. Midway does not end the war. It does something more decisive. It defines the terms on which the war will now be fought. In the years that follow, battles will be bloodier than anything seen on those decks. At Guadalcanal, men will fight in mud and disease for an airstrip that seems too small to matter. At Tarawa, Marines will wade ashore into a wall of fire. At Saipan and Iwo Jima, the ground itself will become a furnace. At Okinawa, civilians will die alongside soldiers in numbers that defy comprehension. None of these places will feel like victory. All of them will feel like endurance. And all of them are born here. What you felt on that deck, the heat, the shock, the sudden, terrible clarity, was history changing direction. Not with a speech, not with a declaration, but with fire falling from a cloudless sky. This was not just a battle. This was the moment when the myth of invincibility collapsed in smoke and flame, and a new reality was born. One where wars are decided not by how boldly you strike today, but by whether you can still fight tomorrow. After these 5 minutes, the Pacific is no longer a stage for daring raids. It becomes an arena of endurance. From here on, the question is not who is braver, but who can build, supply, train, and replace long enough to outlast the other. In that war, the outcome is no longer a mystery. The ocean still stretches flat and blinding under the sun. The wind still tears at jackets. Engines still howl. But something fundamental has shifted beneath the surface. The empire that once believed it could shape history with a single blow now faces a conflict it cannot outrun. And the men who stood on those decks, breathing smoke and salt, felt it in their bones before any report could confirm it. They did not just witness a victory. They lived the end of an illusion.